So, do you ever remember reading the classic Where's Wally books back in the day? Or Where's Waldo? I'll never get used to saying it that way. Well, did you know he actually has a stoner cousin? In fact, he actually has 8 of them, and they can be found on every page in this book. I actually found one of them right here. Tell you what, I'm clever me, lad, swear down. Not gonna lie, the artwork in this book is absolutely class. I'm really happy to endorse this product because genuinely it's something I would have just bought outright and played with myself. And to be honest, I actually did just buy it outright because I genuinely was happy to support it. I also know that it's something you guys would genuinely enjoy. There's so many great references to stoner, hippie, psychedelic culture, as well as homages to pieces of artwork such as Hieronymus Bosch, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, the Stoned Ape Theory. It's cool to finally have the ability to talk about some sponsored content that I think is really creative. I showed the book to my mates and they were absolutely transfixed. They're all going to get a copy as soon as they can. 20 different artists came together to produce this, and you can obviously tell there's a lot of love and care that went into making it. It's fun for the whole family, and if you fancy buying it, the link's down in the description. So yeah, don't forget to check them out, and without further ado, let's start today's video. This trip occurred on December 2nd, 2022. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so I'd been planning this trip for weeks, knowing they would be away, and that I could have the privacy I needed for the experience. I had a rather normal morning, went to the gym, came home, grabbed a shower and ate a light lunch. At approximately 2:45 PM, I decided it was time and went up to my room, lit some candles and began to weigh out 5 grams of mushrooms. This was a very normal dose for me, and one I've taken many times before and I've had extremely positive and transformative experiences on. About 3 PM, I finished eating them and lit a joint containing about 1 gram of marijuana. This was also very normal for me. I usually smoke about half a joint to help calm my nerves and ease my mind. I did exactly that, smoked about half the joint and began to feel the effects of the mushrooms rather quickly, about 10 to 15 minutes after finishing them to be exact. This was definitely a little quicker than I was used to feeling them, but I didn't really think too much of it. I began to play some music on my speaker, very low-key and relaxing songs, nothing that would influence the trip too much, and went over to my bed and laid down facing my ceiling. At this point in the trip, the visuals really started to come over me, seeing patterns and shapes everywhere, and I could feel my mind expanding by the second. Everything was going normal for me. I started having deeper and more profound thoughts. I was thinking a lot about the government and how I don't agree with how we run our society, and how it's wrong for people in power to try to force others to have certain beliefs or opinions. This is something I think about a lot while on mushrooms. Not exactly sure why I go to this thought a lot, but I just think it's ignorant to try and make people believe or conform to certain things, or acting certain ways, because obviously, everyone is going to have their own opinions and thoughts, and I don't think it's right to try to push people down a certain path. Things began to shift a little next. The music I was playing went to a song I didn't like, so I went to change it, but I hate being on my phone whilst I'm tripping, so I ended up not picking another song and began to lay in my bed in silence. In the moment, I didn't really think too much of it. However, thinking back on it now, this would prove to be a significant event. I normally have some music or the TV on, or just something to keep me connected to reality. After the music went out, I really started to dive deeper into my own mind. I remember thinking about how self-conscious I can be, how anxious I always am, and how critical I am of every little thing about myself. I always have the constant feeling when I'm out in public that all the attention is on me, not in a cocky sense, but because of how much anxiety I have. While these thoughts were going through my head, I burst out laughing and said something along the lines of, "You idiot, no one is paying attention to you." This wasn't in a negative sense, but more just a joking way of trying to make myself realise how untrue that is, and to learn to just relax, and not let my anxiety control me. At this point, I remember getting the urge to use the bathroom. I got up and went, and then when I came back into my room, I propped my door open with a pillow. This is mainly because my dogs were downstairs, and I wanted them to be able to come in and out of my room as they pleased. I was standing in the middle of the room, and I began to take my clothes off, which I realised may be odd, but I often get this urge when I trip because I like to try and focus on how my body is feeling, and not be influenced by my clothes touching my skin. I shut my curtains as well, which similarly to the music shutting off, I didn't really think much of at first, but I also believe now that this proved to have an effect on where my trip would soon begin to go. I sit down on my carpet in the middle of the floor in my room, the visual effects continuing to rise and still feeling my mind expanding by the second. This is where things really began to shift for me. I don't remember too much about the next few minutes that occurred, but I do remember that my dogs began to bark downstairs. I tried to focus on my breath to not let it frustrate me, but then I remember yelling out, "I'm God! Please stop barking and just let me be God!" They proceeded to stop, and then I fully laid down on my carpet, staring up at my ceiling once again. I really started to get into my own mind. I remember thinking, or maybe even saying things like, "Oh, I've never felt anything like this. This is the strongest trip I've ever had. I am God." A little more time went by. I can't recall how much, but these thoughts continued to occupy my mind. The next thought that came over me would drive my trip for about the next 4 hours or so. I'm dying. At first I didn't take it too seriously, passing it off as just another thought, thinking I would move on to other things. However, this thought wouldn't leave my mind, and it soon began to completely envelop me. I started thinking, wait, am I dying? Is this what dying is? I can't tell if I'm dead or alive. I remember my dog started barking again, which frustrated me given the mindset I was in. I leaned over and grabbed the pillow holding my door open and said, "Please stop barking, I'm literally dying right now, just let me die in peace." I slid the door shut and held the pillow in my arms, hugging it as I truly began to believe I was experiencing death. I remember thinking about your video on the 10-gram mushroom trip report, facing insanity. Is this what he was talking about in that video? Is this what dying is? More and more fear started to come over me, and panic quickly ensued. The visuals I was seeing were far more prominent than anything I'd ever experienced before. Everything was moving and shifting, and it really felt like I was seeing the world through the eyes of God. My thoughts kept racing. I started to become really disassociated from myself and where I was. I kept thinking about the world and the universe, and when I would think about it, everything felt so small. It felt like my mind was bigger than anything else that existed. It truly felt like I was in another dimension. I kept looking at the clock in my room to try and gauge how long it had been, and thinking about how long this was going to last, but I had no sense of time anymore. Every time I looked, I couldn't tell how long it had been or what time it was the last time I looked. I started to feel like I was outside the concept of space and time and that they didn't exist anymore. This was around the time my panic became much worse, because I truly felt like I was going to be trapped inside this mindset for eternity. I thought that this was going to be my existence forever, and I would never return back to myself or what I knew as my reality. I started to become very emotional, crying while thinking about the people who I thought would never see me or know me for who I was ever again. It started to feel like I had two minds or two levels of consciousness. On one end, I felt like myself, the one who was dying and was going to be lost in this headspace forever. And then on the other end, I felt like I was God, who was witnessing this entire event taking place. The thought kept coming over me, like a voice was saying to me, "You have no idea what you're messing with." And I remember sitting up and saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Just repeating these words over and over because I felt like I was being punished in some way for taking these mushrooms to try and answer the deeper and more profound questions I have about life. These were typical questions, like what is the meaning of life, why and how am I here, what happens when I die. I began to hug and hold myself tightly and saying things like, "I'm so sorry, brother, but this has to happen. I love you and this is for the best, and you'll make it through this." I kept repeating all these things and more as I kept diving deeper into the pure madness I was feeling. It became this incredibly raw and emotional experience. I was overwhelmed with pain and sorrow, as I truly believed I was saying goodbye to myself and who I knew myself to be. But, at the same time, I kept trying to reassure myself that this was happening for a reason, and that it needed to happen. This whole time, I kept trying to remind myself, "You're just tripping. It always ends, and it's going to end this time, just like all the others." But every time I had this thought, it would be gone in seconds, overpowered by the fact that I had never experienced anything like this in my life. I can't describe the feeling of wanting to escape my own mind so badly, and being terrified that I couldn't get out of it. I remember standing up and leaning against my bed, trying to gather myself and get myself out of this panic. But no matter what I did, my mind always returned to the fact that I truly believed I was dying. I thought about trying to sleep it off, but when I thought about sleep, I knew I'd never be able to, and it felt like I'd never be able to sleep again. This only furthered my panic and fear that I would never get out of this headspace. I began pacing around my room wanting someone there to comfort me, thinking of my parents, my sister, my closest friends. I thought about the 10-gram mushroom trip report video again, remembering how the writer said that they were glad they didn't call anyone because they knew all they'd do is scare them. I knew how true that was, and as awful as I was feeling, and as much as I believed that this was never going to end, in the back of my mind, I knew it would be over soon, and that I would be glad I didn't reach out to anyone at all. I kept saying to myself, "I love you. You'll make it through this, I promise. repeating that over and over while still crying and hugging myself, trying to do anything to get myself through it all. At one point I looked at myself in the mirror and said, "I'm so sorry this is happening to you. You'll get through this, I promise." I walked over next to my bed because I began to feel nauseous, and honestly I wanted to throw up because I just wanted to do anything to make this end. I grabbed my trash can and my entire body was shaking. I kept repeating things similar to what I'd said before, just trying anything to help myself through what was happening. I ended up making myself get sick because I just wanted it to end so badly. After I threw up, the visual was still very strong, and I obviously knew it wasn't going to instantly stop, but I felt a little better because in some way I knew me getting sick proved there would be an end to this. However, I was still very emotional, still crying, and I began venting about things in my life that caused me anger and frustration. Basic things like a breakup I recently had, work troubles, people making untrue and unfair remarks about me. In yet another weird way, this helped make me feel a little better too, as these things helped to connect me to the person I knew myself to be. I remember thinking I needed to keep connecting myself back to reality. I turned on my TV, opened my curtains, and put my clothes back on. I wanted to get out of my room and be away from the place where I felt I'd just experienced my own death. So I went downstairs, which certainly was the right decision to continue calming myself down. Seeing my dogs was very helpful. I pet them and sat on my couch as I finally started to feel like I was sober again. I'd never felt so grateful to feel sober. I was just so happy that the nightmare I'd felt I just went through was over. I had now realised it had been about 4 hours. I couldn't believe it hadn't been longer. I thought about myself being at the gym that morning, feeling like that was a lifetime ago. I remember feeling similarly to how the writer of the video felt. I felt stupid that I let myself panic so bad, but during that whole time there was nothing anyone could have said or done to make me believe I wasn't dying. After another hour or two, I called my best friend up. While I knew he had never had an experience like this before, we'd done mushrooms many times together, so I knew he'd understand better than most. We talked for about an hour, and I went to bed shortly after, still attempting to understand what had just happened and why it happened. The next day was definitely off for me. I went out just to grab some lunch, a place I often go to, and I remember stopping and questioning my reality. I struggled to connect myself to what was real and what wasn't, and honestly, writing this now, almost a week later, I still find I'm having to re-establish myself in reality and reconnect with who I am. I'm conflicted now, because I don't want to be afraid and run away from what happened, because I've had so many positive experiences with psychedelics, but I'm also struggling to know how to properly work through this and improve myself so I can hopefully return to tripping. I want to be able to trip again, but I need to better understand the experience and know how to more properly handle it if and when it happens again. Thinking back on the experience after the fact, I can see the things like having no music, shutting my door and curtains, really played a role in the way things went, because I completely isolated myself from the world and from reality. This is the story of how I'm discovering more of my spiritual history, as I dive deeper into the realms presented by mushrooms. During the build-up and rehearsals, and slow increments upwards in dosage, I earned many skills absolutely essential to navigating doses of 10 dry grams and above. To me, the most important lesson was to learn to close my eyes frequently, and allow for true astral travel type experiences. The second most important skill is breathing. Being able to hold steady control over one's breath is the only thing needed to navigate the difficult parts. I discovered some very interesting closed eye phenomena once I started dosing 5 dry grams and over. Closing my eyes would start up with very DMT-esque fractal patterns, much like a spinning tunnel at some fantastically psychedelic country fair. Multitudes of colours and shapes, but for me, always spiralling inwards, always suggesting some sort of portal or tunnel into my mind or out of it, whichever way you choose to look. I am by now so familiar with it, I name it the portal, and I consider its presence as standing at the crossing line of physical reality and hyperspace. The swirling psychedelic fractal light show usually fades to a black like I have never seen in real life. Pure darkness. I find it a warm and comforting space to enter. I usually see bunches of what I can only describe as hieroglyphs suspended in the nothing around me. They are always a vibrant electric blue in colour, and I can see a bit of a halo effect to their outlines as they shine. There is usually a dense cluster I can gravitate towards and focus upon. It feels like some sort of control room, and the glyphs are not static. I might interact with them at will. Sometimes it is clear where there are slots for them to fall into, so to speak, a space they are not filling, an orientation that is off, and I end up rearranging some of them by suggestion of will alone, Where things get very interesting for me is what happens after completing one of these electric puzzles. I always go through a form of astral travel. One time I remember waking up in a class full of kids, but nobody could understand a word I was saying. Another time, I woke up in what looked like a study filled with all sorts of strange engineering artifacts I could not comprehend the uses of. I only had a vague idea that they were blueprints of sorts. They looked like living snow globes, as if each globe was containing something much larger than itself, perhaps on a scale that would dwarf humans. On these doses, the experience does not last long enough to adjust to a new reality at all. I'm talking brief periods, as in seconds of touching base with these realities. I wish I could describe how the architecture, how gravity and light and time and everything we take for granted in our physical reality is different there, very different. These warm-up experiences were enough to absolutely assure me of multi-dimensional existence, and open my mind to the possibility of being not only a brief and futile drop in the ocean that is human existence, but that there is a very real and glaringly apparent possibility that this existence here, right now, on planet Earth, is but a page in a chapter to a novel so epic Stephen King would need 6 books to pen it down. And of course, this intrigues me, and I'm dedicating a fair amount of time and energy in the pursuit of finding and deciphering more information. The first time breaking the 10-gram barrier. I need to state outright that nothing could prepare me for how 10 dry grams hits. The dose before was 8.5 dry grams, so I felt fairly confident in a similar experience. How wrong I was. Mushrooms have a very steep dosage curve, meaning that last 1.5 grams made the kind of difference my experience suggested would come from 5 dry grams. This is the big reason to never get cocky with mushroom doses, and always increase your dosage by a gram at most at a time. No individual can predict where your breakthrough dose will be exactly, but it will be around the 7 to 10 gram mark. It would be best to hit this line gently and not run over it madly like I did in a later trip. As your experience grows, your breakthrough dosage will become higher also. As it so happened this evening, both me and my girlfriend at the time hit breakthrough dose for the first time that evening. I ate 10 dry grams and she ate 7. Coming onto this dose was close to being rolled hard by a changa chilim. It truly hit me with all the mad intensity and power of DMT, in wave after terrifying wave. Also, much like DMT, all my muscles relaxed to the point that I was too lazy to get off the bed. A painting my cousin had made of a sunset over some mountains came to life. The sun was truly setting in it, the grass swaying in a breeze that seemed to blow through the painting. It was deeply moving and beautiful. The patterning on my bedsheet started raising up and floating in the air above the bed. With each wave of psilocin hitting my brain, the room became more and more strange, until at about 20 minutes after ingestion, a massive wave overtook me, and my vision phased out completely for a few seconds. I couldn't see anything at all. It lasted just long enough to be slightly disturbing, and when my vision came back, I was in another world. The room was barely recognisable. It looked like we were floating in the middle of a strange, almost Persian-looking space. Alien glyphs and crystal structures floating in midair. The floor had transformed into a liquid mess of what seemed like moving glass panels, as if the floor had taken a hit of DMT and was hallucinating loudly at me. Silent darkness was not the plan for this trip, but a power failure around 45 minutes after ingestion meant there was no choice in the matter. As the room was plunged into darkness, I was not concerned. It was time to travel. The dark and quiet in the room was ideal for just relaxing with eyes closed and seeing where the journey went. I got myself snuggled into the covers after some effort. I can seriously not describe or emphasise the extreme laziness experienced on these kind of doses. One really just doesn't want to lift an arm even. Got my Great Dane to snuggle up, and off we went. What a journey this was. Something to note about this level of hyperspace travel is that feelings exist. I mean physical feelings, from the realms visited and the forms inhabited, are as clear to me as the memory of taking a swim in the ocean. These were experiences of true multidimensional existence, and I got to stay in some spaces for long enough to truly have strong memories. Time tends to do its own thing in hyperspace. Almost all of the experiences this evening had a strong aquatic theme to them. Underwater, oceans, in the stars, in some sort of cosmic sea, and so on. The first world I visited was at first not visible at all. I could feel myself as, well, I had no idea at first. I relaxed, I observed, and I noticed that what I feel my body to be is not human. I could start slowly feeling and seeing beings move around inside my body, or structure rather. I could feel them tending to various functions of me, a complete symbiotic arrangement. After some time examining what I could feel and building up a mental image, the stunning realization was that I was some form of ship, a water-going vessel of sorts, but totally alive, sentient, and in partnership with this crew. I very clearly remember what for now I will call my captain. We'll get to this being again many times. She seems to be a companion on many planes, from many realms and timelines. I remember her being overjoyed that I'd woken up, like I was sick and unconscious and had finally crept out into the light. This theme was to repeat itself during this trip. She told me it is time to leave, basically run away from a conflict we were locked in. I got to get a glimpse of this strange cosmic engine as she set us to power off into wherever, like a massive scorpion trawling a liquid star-filled ocean, beautiful beyond words, terrifying beyond comprehension. It was built for war and nothing but. As this thing punched out and accelerated into and onto its destiny, I was brutally and instantly transported to my next vision. Once again, there was no human body. I was underwater, breathing water. My shape was, well, the best I can say is like a cross between an oyster and some sort of worm. Yeah, it's weird, I know, not a favourite memory of mine. I was being nurtured by a similar being, something also wormy and with a shell, and I was attached to this creature completely, like conjoined twins. It was combing through my antennae, as is the only way I can put this memory. I had defined fin-type structures that seemed to be made up of tiny waving hair arranged into double-sided comb shapes, almost looking like leaf skeletons but incredibly intricate. Thousands upon thousands of superfine hairs, like raw nerves, they were receiving some essential information carried in the water. Gently and deliberately, it was going over each and every hair, almost like a paranoid mother looking for nits on their kid. I remember it finding something, and letting go of the most horrible scream-type vibration I can imagine. A scream that hit on every level but audio, right down to my core, inspiring shock, surprise and fear. I then remember being ripped from my warm place, and that which was caring for me rose up in absolute fury. It looked ready to kill. But fortunately, this is where this vision ended, and I was then transported into the next. I woke up in a room with old friends around me. One of them I actually know from real life. It didn't look much different. The rest were companions not known to me on planet Earth yet. Once again, there was joy at my recovery. There was also a fair bit of anger from one of my friends for the condition I had been in up to that point. The rest of this part is a touch personal and not to share, but suffice to say, I knew about COVID lockdowns coming after this trip, and they happened exactly 4 weeks later. First time I heard about COVID was in this vision, I shit you not. The last major vision from this evening is very special. It was no vision, only feeling. I could feel myself as what I like to call a mermaid. In reality, I was more Davy Jones in looks, tentacles and strange arrangements of internal organs and so on. But most of all, feeling more comfortable and at peace than I have ever been before. It's during this time that I started realising what this journey had been trying to teach me. That there is a bit more to existence than right here and right now, and the true nature of my existence is well worth investigating. I have friends and family, companions that have been around for way longer than my existence here. Coming down was spectacular. Lights back on, hallucinating balls, magnificent visuals I can spend a whole day describing, but I think this is enough for this chapter. I really want to tell the rest of the story, so I'll make time to do so. For now, let me finish off by stating that breakthrough dosage psilocybin is not a joke. Not to be done anywhere but on your bed, and make certain the road to the bathroom is clear. Build up into it slowly, and your experience will prepare you for the onslaught upon your reality. I can strongly recommend it, but only to those willing to build up a high level of experience. Mushrooms go much deeper than DMT for me, and they last a long time. Backstory. In 2015, a tragic event occurred. The Collective Club fire. A concert where hundreds were injured, leaving 64 dead, including the band members. The band was called Goodbye to Gravity. This meant the beginning of me questioning everything. The waking point. Over the years, I became extremely depressed. Looking back at my fucked up childhood, I just started asking, why? I went from religious to an atheist. In 2018, I was about to end my life, putting my neck on the rails and let the train pass by. As I was standing there, I realised I can do whatever I want. There's nothing to lose anyway. I stood up and gave myself some more time to live life the way I wanted, not the way society wants. I found out about psychedelics and their healing properties. I felt a calling towards them, so I began my intensive research. In September 2021, I had my first mushroom trip, a 3-gram dry of some potent African psilocybe netalensis. It was the first time I've cried in years. I was grateful for meeting them. The trip. October 30th, 2021. It was the 6-year anniversary of the collective fire tragedy. I'd got my hands on 20 grams dry of psilocybe netalensis. I was about to consume all of them, but thankfully I only took 10 grams. I felt extremely bad that day. Everywhere around my room was just trash. I couldn't even walk straight. You've heard of set and setting? Nah, doesn't sound familiar to me. Throw it out the window. It was night. My apartment buddy wasn't home, only his cat. I've turned on my webcam and started eating the mushrooms, recording on my channel, Ethereal Psychonaut. It took 30 minutes to eat all 10 grams. I was already feeling the strong effects building inside. I felt like I was about to take off. Keep in mind that it was my second time ever tripping. I've turned off the lights, blindfolded myself, and went to bed. I began travelling at a very fast speed inside of a spaceship that was organic and alive. There were other beings too. I left the spaceship and started floating towards some entities that weren't very aware of my presence. They either had 1, 3, 5 or more eyes, floating on mist. I remember then meeting a large entity that stretched across my field of view. I started opening up about my pain and suffering, and my life so far as a human being. I was a broken vase. Some parts of the entity didn't care. Other parts weren't even aware of myself. Other parts tried gluing me back together with warmth and love, while others started killing me. Perhaps I met every part of me that makes me whole. I met myself. I could see the boundaries of my inner universe made of white stripes like a spider web, and out of it came an ethereal female entity. Started merging and bonding with me, feeling pure love for the first time in my life. Mushroom sex, even felt tentacles and reptile skin touching me. Hit the 1 hour mark and became very nauseous. I took off my blindfold and got up to open the door so I could go to the bathroom and puke. Once I've opened the door, there was another dimension. I stood there for a moment. As I walked out of the room, I closed the door behind me. Now, I was officially lost. I'd forgotten where I came from. I still had the concept of a bathroom, so I went inside but didn't puke. I just stood on the toilet seat, watching as I'm slowly beginning to get ripped out of my body. As I'm trying to get back to my reality, I'm stuck in a loop of me going to the bathroom and the room again. That was a mental labyrinth. I end up in the bathroom again, where the cat starts acting very weird. She knew something was up with me, but decided to show me around anyway. She was like, "I'm supposed to show you around, then you can pass to the other side." It really felt like I was accessing her dimension. I don't remember what happened in between, but I remember everything started to shake profusely. The cat got out of the bathroom really fast, and that's when I started losing my mind. Many things were happening around me. I wasn't in a bathroom anymore. Hopping dimensions and being ripped apart from everything. It was the most painful thing I've ever felt, physically and mentally. I started screaming in agony, punching everything around me. I was stuck inside nothing and everything at the same time. No more identity, no more past or future. Time and space were never real. What is real? The universe was shrinking and expanding out of myself. It kept on doing that for what felt like infinity. Last thing I remember is that I had my face inside the toilet, puking my guts out. I fell on my back in the bathroom and started puking in my own mouth, drowning in vomit. The breathing was agonizing. At this point, I was in a place with no time and space, where everyone, everything that ever existed, will ever exist and never exist, appeared in front of me. In that place, it wasn't about judging, it was about forgiveness. They forgave me for what I did to them, and forgave them for what they did to me. The last ones were my father, my mother, and my little brother. I did the thing with my father, and he disintegrated. There was no more concept of him ever existing. Same with my mother as well. But when my brother started to disappear, it really hit me. I realised I actually care about someone. I care about him. I didn't have time to suffer. There was no more concept of him. He was never alive and he won't be born again. Everything around me starts collapsing as I start to disintegrate as well. I began expanding at the speed of light until I became nothingness. An ultimate misunderstood force gave me a big hug and I felt home for the first time, the brightest thing there is. I was nothing and everything. This is the nature of God. It is nothing and everything. God is you, God is me. God is an alien dog crapping on some alien street. It was never here and it won't be born again. Somehow, I didn't die by drowning in my own vomit. Or did I? I regained my powers and went to my room, not knowing who I am or where I was heading to. I only recognised 2 blue lines. It was the webcam. I slowly came back and took a long shower, the best I've ever had. I was laughing like a maniac. I had the answer to everything, the key to everything. This misunderstood cosmic joke? I got the punchline. And then, I didn't. No more recollection. I wasn't allowed to tell others the punchline, let alone myself. There isn't a day when I don't think about that experience. It fucked me up for half a year. I have HPPD now, but I don't regret it. It was the most important and the most terrifying and beautiful experience I've ever had. It changed my whole perspective on existence and what divinity really means. Am I still alive? I don't know for sure, but I guess I'll just hang around to see what happens next.